Welcome to another NEBA Spotlight. Today, I'm so happy to introduce Len. Len, tell us about you. Tell us about the business.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. I'm excited to share a little bit with you today. This is going to be less about my business and more just educational for everybody on the call. What I hope you get out of this is either for your own business or for your friends, family, colleagues who run a small business. This is going to be hopefully really helpful for them. I'm going to break it down into two components, and they are related. But first is I'm going to talk about the price of procrastination when it comes to exit planning. When I talk about exit planning, this is about thinking about where your business is going to go. And typically, I'm working with people who are getting to that phase where they're saying, hey, in a couple of years, but this is really good information for any business at any stage. And then, secondly, I'm going to talk about why businesses don't sell. And this came up in last week's discussion. Somebody said, Len, why don't businesses sell? So I'm going to talk about a couple of reasons, so the main reasons why that happens. So first off, question I have is, why do business owners wait so long to get started? And it's nothing intentional. They don't say, gee, I'm just going to wait until the last second, but they're busy with their day to day, and that's what takes their attention. So they also say, well, it's probably a long ways off. I'm going to be doing this for a while. I don't really need to be thinking about this today. And oh, by the way, I don't know where to get started. It sounds like it's going to be hard. So I'll just wait. And this is a huge risk. Most business owners have about 80% of their financial assets tied up in their business. And unfortunately, small businesses are not like a stock or a mutual fund where you can just go list them and they'll sell. It's tends to be a long process, and a lot of times it's not successful. So I'm going to talk to some of the reasons why that happens. Um, and just want to be clear that this isn't a single event. The exit planning isn't just about getting to the end. It's really about making improvements along the way. And, there's a Stephen Covey quote, start with the end in mind, to paraphrase it, which is, don't start thinking about this 30 years in. Start thinking about this when you create your business, right? So you should be doing this years in advance, not months. And there are benefits along the way, lower stress, higher profits, more time off. So doing this earlier and being ready is not just at the end, it's really all along the way. But if you don't, if you rush this process, you lose all kinds of leverage, and it gets to be really stressful. And it happens quietly. That's one of the things I'm going to talk about. Is it's not like this sudden change. It's like little things creep in, and then they get really hard to fix toward the end. But when you do this right, you got a lot of flexibility. So I'm going to talk about 7 reasons why this makes things harder if you wait. The first is to, paraphrase the Rolling Stones, time is not on your side. Um, Exit planning for a lot of business owners is looked at as important, but not urgent. So it gets pushed off for other things. And somebody talked about this in our breakout room today. Owners assume that things are going to stay the same, they're going to be healthy, the markets are going to be favorable. In reality, 50%, over half of the business transitions that happen in the US are triggered by an unplanned event. We call them the 5 Ds: death, disability, divorce, disagreements between partners, and distress. Example of distress would be, the pandemic. Those kinds of things typically trigger a sale, and they're not planned, right? And when you have to do that, when you have to sell quickly, it really reduces your negotiating power and ultimately usually leads to a lower sales price. The second reason is that buyers care about what you've done, not what you might do. And so sellers, when company owners are always like, oh, but there's all this opportunity here, there's all this upside. And the buyers say, yeah, anytime you say could, should, would, when it comes to your growth, your systems, your talent, I'm discounting that because you didn't do it. So I'm not going to pay you for it. And, that leads into if you talk about your systems, they've got to be documented and scalable. They can't be on a sheet of paper, right? So this all gets down to you've got to prove it. If you want to get value for it, you can't just talk about it. So that's another big reason is this whole idea that you got to prove it first. And that leads into risk, and that risk really impacts price. And so if you promise things and you think your price is here, but you've proven things, that's going to say your price is here. And that difference is called risk. And when you ultimately calculate the value of a business, the price is the future growth, right? So how much cash flow are you going to generate divided by one plus, and this is kind of a phony formula, but you get the idea, the risk associated with that future growth. And the higher the risk as a percentage, say, the lower your ultimate price is going to be. So that's how this comes into play because buyers say, I want to minimize risk, right? The next step is that I talked about it earlier that it's not these big changes that cause problems. It's things like there's only one employee who understands a core process. And if they walk out the door, the business is in big trouble. Workarounds that should be systems become ingrained, right? There's this hack that everybody does rather than implementing a system. Or revenue gets really concentrated in only a few customers, which again increases risk. And maybe that happens slowly over time. Or the final example where, maybe profit margins just erode a little bit every year and nobody really notices. All of a sudden you're down 5% in your profitability. And now that's a big deal, right? And so these things happen slowly and nobody really realizes them. All right. A big one here, owner dependency. If the owner has to make every decision, I tell business owners, if you make every decision, your business is worth $0, right? Because it's a huge risk for any buyer, and it indicates that the business isn't solid. It's not built on a great infrastructure, right? And there are ways to solve this: delegate, document, all these kind of things. But pay attention to this one. You're going to hear this one again. So, my sixth point is that good enough is never enough when it comes to your financials. Buyers expect that you've paid attention to your business. There's nothing back in the envelope. You can describe what drives your business. And one of the things to note is that financial issues can't be solved instantly. If you've got problems, those typically take years to go away. Same with you can tax advantage a sale of a business, but again, takes time. You can't do that overnight. I'll get on to my seventh reason, which is really just, I talked about this earlier, not having a plan really increases your stress levels, especially during the sales process. And that comes from, there are things you could have fixed and you didn't. So that's a frustration that comes because buyers point those things out and you're like, yeah, well, I should have fixed that, but I didn't. Um, and then you're forced to compromise, right? And so you're not in control when it comes time to manage the process, and you do a lot of the I could have, would have, should have, and that's just no fun, right? Because the buyers say, well, you could have, but you didn't, so that's going to impact how this whole deal plays out. So those are my seven reasons. I'm going to talk about a really disturbing stat. Based on industry estimates, only about 20% of the businesses that go up for sale actually sell. So 4 out of 5 don't, which is really disturbing. Again, back to my earlier point, 80% of financial assets tied up in a business. Wow, you've got all that and you can't sell it. It's going to have a huge impact on what you're going to do next, your next great adventure. There's three big reasons. The first is unrealistic price expectations. Business owners say, hey, I've, blood, sweat, and tears into this business for 30 years. The problem is buyers just don't care. They care about what you've built, how easy it is to take over. Second point, owner dependency. This is all about, can the business run without you? If it can't, talked about earlier, it's not worth anything. And the third is, if you haven't, done a great job of managing your business, understanding what drives it, and being able to hand it over to somebody else, that's the third big reason why it doesn't sell. That's going to end my presentation. This is me. If you'd like to learn more, my website is greaterheightscoaching.com. It's a great way to get in touch with me. Thank you very much.